Okay, guys, usually when you see me sitting in a chair in front of a toolbox, it's bad news, but in this case, it's not bad news. I'm still getting over that other thing, but life goes on and we've got to cope. Anyways, crib notes. In the last shop update, I told you that I would brief you on the transmission and what I found hauling it, temperatures, and stuff like that. So I did tell you in that video that I had made a haul. I took a 500 kW gen set out from Pennsylvania out to Wisconsin, to a farmer out in Wisconsin. I kind of showed you some pics of the gen set on the trailer, and I showed you a pic of the crane that was there to unload it when I got there. What I wanted to do is kind of tell you what my experience was with that temp gauge in the transmission on the way out there. So again, that is a replacement G56 in my truck. I had to replace it because the original existing transmission broke. What happened? Now, again, I'm not an engineer, and I'm just telling you this as to what I theorize happened to the transmission. The oil burned in the transmission, the oil overheated and burned. The gears got too hot and broke, and it jammed the gears together in it with the broken pieces. Now, there's been a lot of talk, speculation on the oil that I put in it versus what Chrysler recommends be put into a Ram G56 transmission. Again, and let me just go over this so if somebody new is watching this video, they know exactly what happened. The G56 transmission that's installed in the Ram, and mine is a 2018 Ram 3500, is the G56 is made by Mercedes-Benz. It happens to be made by Mercedes-Benz in Brazil, but that's beside the point. Mercedes-Benz recommends with that transmission in their South American and European trucking market that you install gear oil in it. They make the transmission their recommendation, and what they install in their transmission for South American and European market is gear oil. Chrysler puts it in their Ram pickup trucks, but they put ATF, automatic transmission fluid, in it. Even though Mercedes recommends that they use gear oil, they still put automatic transmission fluid in it. Now keep in mind, it's a manual transmission. It isn't that big. A stock transmission holds 5 quarts of oil. So they put 5 quarts of ATF, automatic transmission fluid, in the transmission, and it is not cooled. My theory on the whole thing is maybe automatic transmission fluid would work in that transmission, but I feel that it would have had to have been cooled. Just like automatic transmission in an automatic transmission fluid in an automatic transmission is cooled. Automatic transmission has a pump on it to pump the fluid around it, and they use that pump to pump the fluid up to a finned radiator or cooling fins at the front of the truck next to the radiator, actually in front of the radiator, and it is cooled. my thought is if they had done the same thing with the manual transmission and used automatic transmission fluid, it probably wouldn't have happened. It would have been probably cool enough that you wouldn't have burned the oil and thus burned up the gears in it. But that's beside the point. So I put a rebuilt transmission in it. And I put 2 cooling ports on it. Now, they're not pumped or ports that go out to the side. All they are is on the G56 transmission, on each side of the transmission, there is a plate, a cover plate, to accept PTO drives. There's a company that makes extensions that go off of those plates. You take the plate off, put this extension on, and it's a piece of billet aluminum that's been machined and has fins on both the inside of it and fins on the outside of it to transfer heat out and get a airflow through the external fins of it. They also add a quart of fluid per side of cooling that you put on it. So now, instead of having 5 quarts of fluid in the transmission, there are 7 quarts. And I did not use automatic transmission fluid. I used gear oil, synthetic gear oil, and I'll put a pick and pick of what I used. I used AMSOIL, manual transmission and transaxle synthetic gear oil in it. So, one of the things that you find on the internet, if you do research on transmission temperatures, you'll find a lot of people discussing what the temperature should or shouldn't be. I have yet to find well, I don't know this for a fact, but I have yet to find manufacturers' recommendations for gear oil in manual transmissions. So let me tell you what I said that I didn't think I found it. Sometimes people post stuff on the internet and you never know who that person is that's posting it. For all I know, somebody could have posted some figures on the internet that I read, and it could be actually an engineer from a transmission manufacturer, but I don't know that. Usually you find that information in like a PDF file, and it will give a history of references of where the article came from, what they cross-referenced, and who wrote the article. But I'm not saying that maybe some of the information that I found on the internet could have been written by somebody like that. Just wasn't documented as being like that. Anyways, let's get back to the point. Most people on the internet are saying you should never run a manual transmission fluid over 225 degrees. But the problem is, when you get into those discussions on the internet, there's a lot of cross-references, and it turns out people are talking about truck transmissions, like semi-tractor transmissions, pickup truck transmissions, and other people, even though your discussion is about manual transmissions, are throwing numbers in there related to automatic transmissions. So you don't know who's right, who's wrong. The other thing you don't know is what kind of oil that they're talking about. Are they talking about regular petroleum-based gear oil, or are they talking about synthetic gear oil? So, as you saw before, I put a pick and pick of a bottle of the AMSOIL gear oil that I used in the transmission. I called them up and I asked them what temperature range is safe to run that oil at. And they told me that I could run it at 260 degrees and never hauling stuff. You could safely run it at 260 degrees all day long, but never go over 300 degrees on it. So again, I put those cooling ports on, and now I have a G56 with 7 quart capacity, and I put a temperature probe on it, a temperature gauge, an isopro gauge and temperature on it. So I picked up that genset, 18,000 pounds. Again, my trailer weighs a little over 8,000, so I was towing, hauling approximately 29,000 pounds behind the Ram 3500. The day was, I started out, again, this place that I haul this stuff for, this generator rebuilding guy, is in Pennsylvania, but it's very rural Pennsylvania. At his shop, there is no cell phone reception, absolutely no cell phone reception. You probably have to drive about 4 or 5 miles out of town, get up on a hill before you can get cell phone reception. But it is south of Olean, New York, if you want to look it up on a map. Olean being kind of south of Buffalo, but on the Pennsylvania border. Buffalo being up north on the Canadian border, Olean being south of it on the Pennsylvania border. So it's about 30 miles south of Olean. I have to backtrack. So I went, picked up the generator. You have to drive back to Olean to get on Route 86. Route 86 is a road that runs east-west. It dumps out on the eastern end, just north of New York City, and on the western end, it ends at Route 90, basically just outside of Erie, Pennsylvania. So I jumped on that. It is rolling hills in the area. Leaving Olean and heading west on 86, it's moderately rolling hills. Once you get over around Jamestown, New York, the hills become a little steeper, a little closer together, a little higher too. So, but again, it's rolling hills. We're not talking about mountains here. We're talking about rolling hills. So, the day when I left Olean, New York, the ambient outside temperature was 80 degrees, a warm spell that we were having at that time. The ambient temperature was 80 degrees outside. I was doing 68 miles an hour, had the cruise control set at 68 miles an hour. Again, hauling the trailer and that gen set about 29,000 pounds that I was hauling. And the transmission temperature was running around 210 degrees. Now this is with a headwind. Not a big headwind, but enough to probably get the a flag on a flagpole at like a quarter of outright position. Not straight outright, but like a quarter of the way outright. So that stayed that way until I got over around Jamestown, where the hills became a little steeper, a little taller, and a little more often. Now, why I'm saying more often is I'll start up a hill at, let's say, and this is just a hypothetical figure, start up a hill at like 210 degrees and get to the top of the hill, and the temperature might have risen to 220, but it will continue to rise as I start down the other side because it's catching up with itself, let's say. The oil is getting transferred around, the warmer oil is getting transferred around to where that pickup sensor is for the temperature gauge. Heat is getting, more heat is getting dispersed back into the oils from the gears, whatever. But it will pick up that way, or prolong that way, so that after I start down, it will still continue to rise for a while. And then it'll even out. And after a while, it'll start drifting back down again. Now, the drifting back down again happens a lot less rapidly than the rising of the temperature does when you start up the hill. So it takes a lot longer to scrub that heat off through those cooling plates than it does to pick it up going up a hill. But anyways, outside temperature was the same, still on cruise control at 68 miles an hour, and it got up to 230 degrees. Might have been a little bit more than 230 at some points and times. Again, might have scrubbed over or crested the hill at 230, and it might have gone up to 232 or so, but then went back down again. So let's just call it 230. So that was that. Again, 80 degrees, slight headwind, more higher and more rolling hills. East of Cleveland, I was on 90 now, east of Cleveland, and again, it is slight rolling hills. The outside temperature had risen to 82 degrees. I was at 68 miles an hour. Now the hills were less tall, less steep, but higher temperature. I was back up around the 230 degree mark. Then I got over east of Chicago, and I was on flatter roads there. It flattens out around that area. So I was on Route 80, east of Chicago. Outside temperature had dropped down to 73 degrees. Still a brisk headwind though, and my oil temperature in the transmission dropped down to 210 degrees. And I continued the rest of the trip that way. If anybody wants to follow it on a map, what I did is got on 80, stayed on 80 till west of Chicago, where I intersected Route 39 and took 39 north up into Wisconsin to where I had to go. But basically, it stayed around that same temperature. I unloaded, went up to Minneapolis, Minnesota, picked up some fuel tanks for generator sets. They were fairly large fuel tanks. Again, I'll throw a pick and pick on here. But now the return trip is with a tailwind and lighter load, less air dam that I'm getting because of that big generator isn't sitting upright in the back of the trailer there. But it's basically the same temperature, but my transmission temperature stayed around 190. Basically the 190, 195 range on the return trip. So anyways, that's it for the oil that I used in the G56 and what my findings are with the temperature under hauling load. So if anybody's got any comments, anything to add to it that, or thoughts on it, just leave them. But let me get on to other things now.